Forget the Hollywood gloss and the pompous speeches about freedom you have heard in movies. The real Sparta is not a city of heroes, but the first factory in human history dedicated to the production of living weapons, a place where the dystopias of the future would seem like bedtime stories. Here, the right to life had to be earned before taking a single breath. In this video, you will learn why Spartan infants were bathed in undiluted wine instead of water, and why the quiet cry of a child could become a death sentence. We will reveal the shocking details of Spartan marriage, why brides were shaved bald on their wedding night and dressed in men's clothing, and why the law compelled husbands to voluntarily rent out their wives to other men. You will see how 7-year-old children were turned into ruthless killers, forced to steal and survive in the bitter cold, and you will learn about the secret death squads that went out hunting not for animals, but for people. Watch until the end to understand how this perfect machine of eugenics, designed to create a Superman, eventually devoured itself, turning the greatest warriors of history into a pathetic attraction for bored tourists. Ready to learn the true, bloody price of perfection? Then welcome to the real Sparta. Forget the white togas of philosophers strolling under olive trees. Forget the marble statues embodying the harmony of body and spirit. Erase from your memory the Hollywood gloss with six-pack abs and pretentious speeches about liberty. Where we are descending now has nothing to do with freedom. This is the first factory in human history for the production of living weapons. Here, in the valley of the Eurotas River, in the 9th century BC, a monstrous social experiment was launched, compared to which the dystopias of the 20th century seem like childish fairy tales. Welcome to Sparta. Or, as contemporaries called it, the state where even the walls have ears, and the bed belongs not to the couple, but to the king. Imagine entering a Spartan house. There is no luxury here. It smells of raw wood, sweat, and fear. The silence here is not tranquility. It is the anticipation of an order. You think private life is your inalienable right? Mistake. In Sparta, there is no word for private. There is only state. Your body, your blood, your seed, all of it is a nationalized resource. Lycurgus, that semi-mythical architect of the Spartan nightmare, did not just write laws. He rewired human nature. He looked at love and saw a defect in it, a vulnerability, rust that corrodes the mechanism of war. And he solved this problem radically. Love was abolished. Eugenics took its place. Let us look the truth in the eye. Sparta is not a city of heroes. It is a factory city. And like any factory, there is a quality control department and a conveyor belt. Only instead of steel, they smelt people here. The process does not begin on the parade ground, not in the barracks. It begins in the bedroom. Although calling this room a bedroom is an insult to the very concept of comfort. It is a production floor. There is no place for romance here. Cold, mathematical calculation reigns supreme. Go inside. Darkness. The law forbids the use of torches. A man must sneak up to his wife in the night, like a thief, commit the act of conception, and disappear before dawn to return to the barracks to his real partners, the other soldiers. Why so complicated? Why this game of hide and seek with one's own spouse? Lycurgus believed that rare meetings, saturated with risk and passion, produce more resilient offspring. Do you hear that cynicism? Sex is turned into a dietary supplement for breed improvement. The emotional hunger of the parents was supposed to convert into the physical strength of the children. They believed that satiety kills the quality of the product. If you see your wife every day, you relax. And a relaxed father means a weak sperm. A weak sperm means a dead soldier. A dead soldier is a breach in the phalanx. The logic is flawless and inhumane. Think about it for a second. You do not have the right to choose when to be with a woman. You do not have the right to simply lie there and talk to her about the future while looking at the stars. Because conversations breed attachment. Attachment breeds the fear of loss. And a Spartan should not fear losing anything except his shield. The state acts as the sole matchmaker, the sole pimp, and the sole obstetrician. It was the total nationalization of intimacy. While in Athens poets sang of Eros, here in Laconia, Eros was shackled and put at the service of the military-industrial complex. These are not just strict morals. This is a biological dictatorship. The woman in this scheme is reduced to the function of an incubator. A prestigious, respected, physically strong one, but still an incubator. Girls were forced to run, throw the discus, and wrestle naked in front of young men. Do you think this is ancient feminism? Nonsense. It is a technical inspection. Young men had to see the bodies of future mothers, evaluate the width of the hips, the strength of the back, the endurance of the lungs. No mysteries, no veils. You are not choosing a life partner. You are choosing genetic material. A defective part can destroy the whole machine. It may seem to you that I am exaggerating, but listen to the voices of the Spartans themselves, reaching us through the centuries. Xenophon, who admired this system, writes about it with frightening calm, as if describing the breeding of hunting dogs. He speaks of how marriage was concluded only when the body was in its prime. No early marriages depleting the organism. No late unions producing decrepit seed. Everything strictly on schedule. Everything according to state standards. Can you feel that coldness? It is the cold of a scalpel, cutting everything human out of a human, leaving only the functional. A Spartan wedding is a separate episode in this chronicle of absurdity. No flowers, no hymns to Hymen. A ritual of abduction. Violence elevated to the rank of ceremony. But the most terrible thing happened afterward. The bride, often still very young, was shaved bald. She was dressed in a man's cloak and sandals. She was laid in the dark on a bedding of straw. Why? Psychologists will tell you that this is a way to ease the transition for a young man who has spent his entire conscious life exclusively in a male collective, in the barracks, where the female body was something alien and frightening. They slipped him a surrogate, a woman disguised as a boy, so the warrior would not experience shock from meeting a different nature. Is this not proof of the deepest social pathology? They were so afraid of femininity that even on the wedding night they tried to erase it, to drape it in the coarse wool of a man's cloak. And this conveyor belt worked non-stop. The obsession with perfection demanded sacrifices, and the first victim was the very idea of family. Family, in our understanding, is a shelter, a place where you are accepted as you are, weak, sick, broken. In Sparta, the family was the first circle of hell, the first filter of selection. The father was not a protector. He was the first overseer. His task was not to love, but to evaluate. Does the fruit meet the standards? Will it disgrace the bloodline? If in Athens the house was bolted shut to preserve privacy, then in Sparta, doors essentially did not exist. At any moment, the law could enter your bedroom and check if you were fulfilling the state order correctly. Look at the numbers, but do not look for them in statistical reports. They are written in blood. By the 5th century BC, when the Greek sun was burning out hope, the number of full citizens, Spartiates, began to decline catastrophically. The system was devouring itself. And do you know what the wise legislators came up with? They decided that property rights over a woman were a prejudice. If we want perfect soldiers, Why limit ourselves to one husband? Jealousy was declared a vice, a relic unworthy of a true patriot. If a man is old, his seed is weak, but his wife is young and fertile. Does he have the right to selfishly keep her to himself? No, thunders the voice of Lycurgus. The old man is obliged to bring a young, strong warrior into the house. He must yield his bed to him. He must stand outside the door and rejoice that a new quality unit is ripening in his wife's womb, which will be recorded in his name. This is not adultery. This is a civic feat. Imagine this scene.
The lawful husband himself chooses the breeder for his spouse, guided exclusively by his physical data and combat merits. The woman's feelings? No one asked about them. The biological father's feelings? He is forbidden to get attached to the child. He did the deed, he can leave. But even this is not the limit of the state machine's cynicism. It happened the other way around, too. If a worthy man, a war hero, saw another man's wife who bore strong, healthy children, he could go to her husband and ask to rent her. And refusal was impossible. After all, this was for the good of the polis. To refuse meant placing one's possessive instincts above the good of Sparta. This was no longer just eugenics. It was the complete destruction of the concept of personality. People became breeding stock with citizen passports. The woman turned into a transferable banner of valor, a public vessel for carrying heroes. And this vessel had to work without interruption as long as it could. You might ask, what about love?
Is it possible to kill an instinct? It is. If from childhood you hammer into someone's head that love for a specific person is theft of love from the state. They created a society where the highest form of intimacy was death in the same rank, shoulder to shoulder. Everything else is merely physiology necessary to replenish the ranks. We look at them as titans of spirit, but perhaps we should look at them as victims of the most massive Stockholm syndrome in history, hostages in love with their prison. And so, the product of this intimate assembly line appeared in the world. The cry of an infant broke the silence, but this cry did not bring a smile of tenderness. It started a timer. For 9 months, the womb worked for the state. Now came the moment of truth. In most cultures, birth is a miracle. Here, it was the beginning of a trial. The mother pressed the child to her breast, knowing that he did not belong to her.
She knew that in a few days they would come to her house. Not guests with gifts, not relatives with congratulations. Elders from the file would come. And they would look at the newborn, not as a human being, but as a blank. The mother's words sounded not like love, but like a sentence. She whispered prayers not to the gods of health, but to the gods of luck, so that they would divert the inspector's gaze from the slightest flaw. Because in Sparta, the right to life had to be earned before you learned to hold your head up. The conveyor belt does not tolerate defects, and if the elder sees that the infant is weak, or has a strange skull shape, or simply cries too quietly, the decision will be instantaneous and not subject to appeal. The wheel is set in motion. The first act of the tragedy is completed in the bedroom, but the second act will unfold on the edge of the abyss, where the price of perfection is measured not in gold, but in tiny bones. Well, in Athens, philosophers argued about the nature of the soul. In Laconia, they forged bodies devoid of doubt. If the man in Sparta was the hammer, then the woman was the anvil. And this anvil had to be made of the same indestructible material. To understand how this factory of death worked, one must look away from the phalanx and look at those who gave birth to it. In the rest of Greece, a woman was a shadow. She lived in the gynecium, the female half of the house, hidden from prying eyes, pale, submissive, occupied with weaving and gossip. Her virtue was invisibility. But the Spartans spat on these traditions. Their women were forbidden to sit at home.
They were forbidden to hide their faces. They were forbidden to be weak. Imagine not a cozy hearth, but a stadium scorched by the sun. Dust, sweat, screams. Here, on equal footing with young men, girls are training. They run, they throw the discus, they wrestle in the mud. Why? Was Lycurgus the first feminist in history? Discard that naive thought. This was veterinary science raised to the rank of state policy. The legislator reasoned coldly, like a breeder. Strong offspring cannot be born from weak parents. To bring a warrior into the world capable of marching for 3 days without water and killing without hesitation, the mother must be a physically flawless machine. Her muscles, her lungs, her pelvis, all of this was viewed exclusively as production capacity. A Spartan girl from the first years of life learned a cruel truth. Her body does not belong to her. It is a state asset. She was fed better than the boys. She was given more freedom, but this freedom was an illusion. It was the freedom of a broodmare being saved for the foals. They were forced to perform naked at festivals, to dance and sing in front of a formation of young warriors. A modern person would see debauchery or exploitation in this. A Spartan saw quality control. Young men looked at girls not as lovers, but as appraisers at a fair. They looked for a broad chest, strong legs, healthy teeth. No romantic haze, only naked, cynical physiology. Shame was declared an enemy because shame interferes with selection. It was here, on the dusty grounds, that the very Spartan woman whose image has become legendary was forged. You have surely heard the phrase, "Only Spartan women give birth to real men." Sounds proud, doesn't it? But listen to the subtext. This is not pride. This is a report on the fulfillment of a plan. This is a statement by a factory foreman that his assembly line does not allow defects. The woman was instilled with the idea that her only value, her only ticket to eternity, is a son who will die for the state. If she cannot bear such a son, she is empty rock, a useless mouth, social garbage. This obsession with efficiency spawned one of the most shocking practices of the ancient world, about which school textbooks remain shamefully silent. We are talking about legalized, state-encouraged polyandry, which is hard to even call polyandry. It was swinging, Spartan style, dictated not by the search for pleasure, but by the dry logic of survival. In a world where every soldier is worth his weight in gold, the concept of marital fidelity became an impermissible luxury. Jealousy? It was burned out with a hot iron. The sense of ownership? It was equated with treason against the homeland. Imagine the situation. An elderly, respected Spartan, a member of the Council of Elders. He has power, he has land, he has a young wife. In any other society, he would guard her like the apple of his eye. But here he looks at himself in a bronze mirror and sees a flabby body. He understands. His time has passed. His seed will no longer provide the quality Sparta needs. What does he do? He goes to the barracks. He looks for a young, fierce warrior whose strength is at its zenith, and he brings him into his home. He says, "Go in to my wife. Sow your seed in her, so that my lineage is filled with strength." This is not humiliation. This is the highest form of civic consciousness. The old man steps into the shadows, yielding to biological expediency. Now look at this through a woman's eyes. No one asks you. Your husband, to whom you swore fidelity, brings a stranger smelling of blood and sweat into your bed himself. And you have no right to refuse. You have no right to feel disgust or, conversely, to fall in love. You are a field that needs to be plowed. And it does not matter whose plow does it, The main thing is the harvest. Your womb is a strategic object. If you are beautiful, strong, and fertile, but your husband is poor or weak, others may come to him. They can ask to rent you, like asking for a war horse or a good hunting dog.
And the law of Lycurgus said, "Give. Do not be selfish. Share your genetic potential with your fellow citizens."
Historians write that there were no lawsuits for adultery in Sparta. Do you know why? Because it is impossible to violate boundaries where those boundaries do not exist. The concept of illegitimate lost its meaning. All children were children of Sparta. Biological fatherhood dissolved into the collective. Every adult warrior was a father to every boy. It was a brilliant and monstrous scheme. By destroying the family, they turned the whole city into one huge dysfunctional barracks, held together by collective responsibility. But what happened to a woman's soul in this conveyor belt? How can one live knowing that you are just a vessel? The psyche adapted in a terrible way. Women became more fanatical than men. They killed pity in themselves so as not to go mad. That very mother who, seeing her son off, said, "With your shield or on it," is not a heroine.
She is a victim of the deepest psychological trauma. She renounced her child in advance. She buried him in her heart in advance, so that when the news of his death came, she would not scream, but only nod dryly. "I knew he was mortal," she would say. This is not stoicism. This is emotional death. The system required women to be as steely as their husbands' swords, and they became steel, cold, cutting. The entire life of a Spartan woman was an endless waiting, first waiting for a husband sneaking in the night, then waiting for conception, and finally, the most terrible waiting, birth. For 9 months she carried under her heart not just a child, she carried evidence. Every day she felt her belly, praying that the fetus would not freeze, that it would kick strongly and rhythmically, because she knew, as soon as the umbilical cord was cut, her power would end. She is only the manufacturer of a semi-finished product. The state will carry out the acceptance. And so that day arrived, the day when the air in the house became thick with tension. Servants prepared hot water, but did not prepare a cradle. In Sparta, it was not customary to rejoice in a new life in advance. Joy is an emotion, and emotions here were issued by coupons. The woman in labor clenched her teeth, trying not to scream too loudly, because even in childbirth, a Spartan woman must maintain dignity. She was not giving birth for herself. She was giving birth for a commission. In her eyes, full of pain and exhaustion, read a silent question. Did I manage? Did he turn out perfect? After all, if Athens left us the Parthenon and democracy, Sparta left us only the myth of death and the word laconic. But the price of this myth began to be paid right here, on blood-soaked sheets. While the child took his first breath, filling his lungs with air, heavy footsteps could already be heard outside the door. They were not coming to congratulate. They were coming to judge. The machine of eugenics, lubricated with the sweat and blood of mothers, was preparing to make its main, most inhumane turn. The first cry of the infant was the signal for the beginning of the tribunal session, where the accused was the infant himself, and his crime could be any, even the most insignificant weakness. The fate of an entire generation was decided not on the battlefield, but here, in the gloom of the birthing room, where life was worth less than a handful of copper coins. In Sparta, a father had no right to decide whether his child would live. This is the first and most terrible truth that must be learned. In any other corner of Hellas, the head of the family could lift the newborn from the ground, acknowledging him as his own,
or reject him. It was his personal power. But here, in the valley of the Eurotas River, fatherhood was merely a bureaucratic formality.
As soon as the umbilical cord dried, the man took the bundle with the infant,
But he did not carry it to the home altar to ask for the ancestors' blessing. He carried it to the Lesche, a meeting place where sat not kind grandfathers, but the elders of the file. These were the most respected, cruelest, and most hardened old men, whose eyes had seen more deaths than births. Imagine this moment. You stand before the council. In your hands is warm, living flesh, your blood. But you dare not say a word in its defense. You are just a courier who delivered a biological sample for examination. The elders do not look at the color of the infant's eyes. They do not look for family resemblance. They are interested only in tactical and technical characteristics. They need tiny limbs, check joints, evaluate the strength of the neck. This is not a medical examination in our understanding. It is the acceptance of a military product.
if the child looks lethargic, if his physique seems disproportionate or frail to them, the sentence is passed instantly.
No, let's wait. He will outgrow it.
Sparta does not believe in potential. It believes only in fact. But a visual inspection was not enough. The paranoia of perfection demanded a deeper check. And then, a vat was brought in. But it did not contain warm water with soothing herbs. It contained wine. Pure, undiluted, tart wine, the fumes of which made the head spin. Historians like Plutarch have preserved for us a description of this monstrous test. The infant was dunked in wine head first. Why? Spartans believed that alcohol is a litmus test for vitality. They believed that a sickly, prone to epilepsy, or simply weak child would go into convulsions and lose consciousness from such shock. His organism would not withstand the chemical attack. Imagine this smell. The sharp, nose-hitting aroma of fermented grapes mixed with the smell of a child's fear. The infant screamed. His tender skin burned from the acid and alcohol. But for the elders, this scream was music. If the child turned red, tensed up, yelled with all the power of his lungs, and his body became hard as stone, it was a good sign. He is hardening, they said. The wine was supposed to either kill the weak or make the strong even stronger. This was the first inoculation of cruelty. From the first days of life, a Spartan learned that the world is not a warm maternal breast, but a caustic, burning environment that tries to destroy you. And what if the child did not pass the test? What if he fell silent? Or if the elder noticed a twisted foot? Then the word apothetai sounded. This is the name of a place that translates as place of rejection or depository. It sounds dry, almost like a warehouse. In reality, it was the Taygetos mountain range, a gorge with sheer cliffs. The father was not allowed to kill the child himself. That would be too personal, too emotional. The state handled the culling. Defective material was taken to the edge of the abyss and left there, thrown down into the cold void. We are used to thinking of this as barbarism, but let us try, no matter how terrifying, to understand their logic. Spartans did not consider this murder. They considered it a return to the gods. In their worldview, the life of a person unable to hold a shield or bear warriors was not a gift, but a curse. Why doom a cripple to a life full of humiliation in a society where only strength is cultivated? Why waste state resources on someone who will never bring benefit? It was radical utilitarianism. Neither for the child himself, nor for the state, is it profitable for him to live if nature did not give him health and strength from the very beginning, they reasoned.
It was an economy of death. Sparta had no fortress walls. Their walls were people, and every person is a brick. If a brick cracked during firing, it cannot be put in the wall, otherwise the whole building will collapse. Therefore, the apothecary was not just a dumping ground for bodies, it was the foundation of their security. The horror of this place was not in the blood, but in the silence. Only the wind whistled in the cliffs of Taygetos, drowning out the last breaths of those who did not pass quality control. There, below, lay thousands of unborn heroes, unrecognized poets, rejected thinkers. Sparta killed its diversity for the sake of unification. It voluntarily castrated its gene pool, leaving only one, the most aggressive branch of evolution. The atmosphere on the edge of this cliff was saturated with icy calm. The executioners felt no hatred for the infants. They felt a sense of duty performed. It was a sanitary procedure, cleansing the nation of impurities. And when the father returned home empty-handed, his wife asked no questions. Tears were forbidden. Mourning for the cold was not declared. Society pretended that these children never existed. It was collective amnesia, a defense mechanism allowing one not to go mad from the realization that you are living on a cemetery of your own children. But let us return to those who got lucky, to those who withstood the bathing in wine, whose limbs satisfied the picky old men. The father brought the surviving son home. It would seem that now one could exhale. Now one could love. But no, it was only a stay of execution. The child received the right to life, but not the right to freedom. He was issued a visa to stay in the family. The validity of this visa was strictly limited. 7 years. Exactly as much as the state allotted the mother to nurse a future soldier. These 7 years were a strange time. Boys were not swaddled. Lycurgus believed that swaddling clothes limited the freedom of development of body and spirit. They were raised in a Spartan but still domestic environment, fed simple food, taught not to fear darkness and solitude. But over every house where a boy grew up hung an invisible sword of Damocles. The mother watched her son grow, take his first steps, laugh, and in every birthday of his, she heard the ticking of a clock. She knew the date. She knew that one morning the door would open, and on the threshold would appear the figure of the pedonomos, the state educator. Survival in the gorge of Taygetos did not grant life. It only moved the child to the next level of the game, where the stakes became even higher. The first 7 years were only a preparatory stage, a brief moment of relative warmth before immersion in absolute cold. Children who avoided flight into the abyss did not yet know that a fate perhaps more terrible than a quick death on the rocks awaited them. They learned to walk, run, and play war, unsuspecting that the real war against their human nature was about to begin.
And when the 7th winter covered Laconia with snow, their childhood ended. Forever. The iron hand of the state was already raised to tear them from their mother's embraces and throw them into millstones that would grind their souls into dust, to mold from this dust ideal bricks for a wall that has no end. And so that day arrived. The day when childhood did not just end, but was amputated without anesthesia. Imagine a 7-year-old boy. In our world, he goes to first grade with a bouquet of flowers and a new backpack. In Sparta, teachers did not come for him. The pedonomos came for him, the state overseer of education. This was not a pedagogue, but an officer with unlimited power. The farewell scene was short and cruel. No tears, no long hugs. The mother, the very one who passed selection and gave birth to a quality product, stood dry and straight as a spear. She had no right to cry when the state took its property. Rough hands tore the crying child from his native home and threw him into the barracks hell, the doors of which slammed shut behind his back for long decades. From that second, the boy no longer had a name. There was only a nickname. There was no home. There was only the Agella, the pack. Lycurgus, that mad engineer of human souls, decided that individuality is poison. Therefore, the first thing they did with the children was shave them bald. All of them. One size fits all. It was an act of unification, erasing the personality. You are no longer your father's son. You are part of the swarm. You are a wolf cub who must gnaw others to survive. The conditions they fell into would today be called a concentration camp for minors, but the Spartans called it the agoge, upbringing or leading, although it would be more accurate to translate it as training. Forget about beds, forget about warmth. Boys were not even allowed blankets. They slept on pallets they had to make themselves. And here the true sadism of the system begins. To make himself a bed, the child had to go to the bank of the Eurotas River and tear reeds. Listen closely. Not cut with a knife, but tear with bare hands. Tools were forbidden. 7-year-old children broke tough, cutting stems with their fingers, tearing skin to the meat, breaking nails. Why? So that hands would toughen, so that pain would become a habit, background noise you don't pay attention to. In winter, when the cold chilled to the bone, they were allowed to add the down of a plant called lycophon to the reeds. It was believed to provide warmth. Imagine these children, with bloody hands, shivering on a pile of trash, huddled together like puppies, trying to preserve remnants of heat. This was their home. Clothes? That is a luxury. Until the age of 12, they were allowed to wear a chiton, but from 12, only 1 cloak per year was issued. 1. A dirty, coarse piece of wool that served as clothing, blanket, and bandage. They walked around dirty. Baths and anointing the body were forbidden, so the skin would become dry, hard, and insensitive. Washing was allowed only a few times a year on big holidays. Dirt became their uniform, a crust protecting against the outside world. Shoes were strictly forbidden. They walked barefoot on the sharp stones of Laconia, on thorns, on scorching earth in summer, and on frost in winter. Their feet turned into hooves capable of withstanding any forced march. But the most terrible tool in the hands of the educators was not the cold. It was hunger. Artificial, calculated, administrative hunger. The head of the Agella, that overseer of the pack, issued rations so meager that they were never enough to get full. Children lived in a state of permanent malnutrition. The stomach cramped. Eyes looked for food everywhere. You might ask, why starve future defenders of the fatherland? Shouldn't a soldier be well-fed and strong? Spartan logic turned everything upside down. Lycurgus claimed that hunger makes the body light and wiry, and the mind sharp. A well-fed person is lazy and complacent. A hungry person is a predator. He constantly thinks about where to get a piece. He scans the space. He is cunning. He is dangerous. The state did not just save on food. It turned the calorie deficit into a simulator for the brain. And here we approach the most paradoxical and immoral lesson of the agoge: legalized theft. Since there was not enough food, boys were officially allowed, moreover, encouraged to steal. They stole food from adult warriors. They sneaked into other people's pantries. They climbed into gardens. This was not a prank. This was a combat operation. Objective: steal a piece of bread or cheese and not get caught.
If you brought the loot to the barracks and shared with comrades, you are a hero. You were praised.
You showed wit, agility, and audacity, qualities necessary for a scout behind enemy lines.
But if you were caught, if you were caught, the punishment was terrible. But understand the nuance. They beat you not because you stole. Theft was not considered a sin. They beat you because you got caught. They beat you for clumsiness. They beat you for stupidity. "You are a bad thief," shouted the overseer, bringing the whip down on the child's thin back. "You allowed yourself to be detected, and in war, that is death." Imagine this inversion in a child's head. Morality is cancelled. There is only efficiency. Stole and got away? Good job. Stole and got caught? Criminal. Good and evil were replaced by success and failure. This birthed monstrous situations. A legendary story told to every newcomer is about a boy who stole a fox cub. He hid it under his cloak when a mentor approached him.
The animal, crazed with fear and darkness, began to gnaw at the boy's stomach, tearing flesh to the innards with claws and teeth. But the little Spartan stood still, smiled, and answered the senior's questions without showing a sign. He allowed the beast to gnaw out his guts and died, but did not give up the theft. For us, this is a story about madness. For them, it was the ideal of fortitude. Better to die than be disgraced by incompetence. In this atmosphere of constant stress, hunger, and cold, it was not the smartest or kindest who survived. The most vicious and tenacious survived. Those who could endure pain. Those who could strike first. Those who could steal the last piece of bread from a friend while he slept and not feel pangs of conscience. The agoge did not cultivate nobility. It cultivated the efficiency of a killer. By the age of 12, these children bore little resemblance to humans. These were little beasts with empty eyes, who saw the world through the slit of a sight.
They knew the taste of blood. They knew the price of silence. But the worst thing was that they began to love this system. Stockholm Syndrome became collective. The pain inflicted on them was perceived as care. "The state beats me so that I become strong," thought the boy, falling asleep on bloody reeds. And while philosophers in the gardens of the academy reasoned about virtue, here, in the dirt and cold, a new breed of people was forming. People whose empathy had atrophied. People for whom pity was a synonym for weakness, and weakness was punished by death. But physical suffering was only a prelude. The body can be hardened by cold and hunger. But to create the ideal slave of the system, one must break not bones, one must break the will. And for this, the Spartan machine had prepared the next stage. An industry of psychological terror, where the main tool was no longer hunger, but humiliation. Physical scars heal. Skin, even stripped to the meat by reeds, grows back, becoming only tougher. But what happened to the mind of a Spartan teenager was irreversible. If the agoge began as a school of body survival, by adolescence it turned into a factory for the lobotomy of personality. Lycurgus did not need just strong soldiers. He needed fanatics. And a fanatic is born only where critical thinking is killed. Therefore, the next stage of the conveyor became the industry of psychological terror, where the main weapon was not hunger, but shame. You have surely heard the expression laconic speech. It is presented to us as a sign of wisdom, the ability to say much in 2 words. If the Spartans answered the threat of the king of Macedonia. Beautiful? Yes. But let's look at the underside of this brevity.
A Spartan boy was silent not because he was wise. He was silent because he was afraid to open his mouth. A word in Sparta was a minefield. Any phrase that seemed stupid, superfluous, or too fancy to the mentor was punished instantly and cruelly. They were not instilled with a love for precision. They were instilled with terror of self-expression. Imagine dinner in the barracks. This is not rest after a hard day. This is an exam at gunpoint. At the head of the table sits an iron, a youth of 20, having already passed the hell of initiation and received power over the younger ones. He looks at you 12-year-olds like a wolf at lambs. He asks a question, not about mathematics or poetry. He asks, "Who is the best man in the city?" Or, "Does this action deserve condemnation?" You must answer immediately. Your answer must be short like a dagger thrust and sharp as a razor. If you hesitate, they hit you. If you start reasoning, using complex turns of phrase or, God forbid, show doubt, they hit you. But the most sophisticated punishment awaited those whose answer simply did not please the iron. He took the boy's finger, the thumb of the hand, and sank his teeth into it. Hard, until blood, until it crunched. Imagine this savage, primal act. Your commander, your big brother, gnaws your flesh, looking you in the eyes, and you do not have the right to even flinch. This is not just pain. This is a demonstration that your body does not belong to you, even at the level of reflexes. Thus, the collective mind was formed. Personality was erased like chalk from a blackboard. I disappeared. Only we remained. Any attempt to stand out, to be different from everyone else, was perceived as a disease, as a cancerous tumor on the body of the squad. Bullying, harassment in the modern sense, was not a school problem fought by psychologists in Sparta. It was a state method of pedagogy. Mentors deliberately pitted children against each other. Old men came to watch the boys' games, not for tenderness, but to sow discord. They provoked quarrels. "Look, he called you a weakling. Will you really tolerate that?" And when the children locked in a furious fight, the adults did not separate them. They watched. They placed bets. They evaluated aggression. Who hits first? Who doesn't give up when being choked? Who cries? He who tried to evade a fight or asked for peace was beaten by the whole pack. Peacefulness was equated with cowardice. You were obliged to be aggressive. You were obliged to hate your neighbor, to prove your usefulness to the system. In this atmosphere of total mistrust and competition, the most controversial and dark institution of Spartan education was born: inspiration. That is what they called relationships between an adult warrior and a teenager. Official history shamefully calls this mentorship, but let's call a spade a spade. It was legalized pederasty, elevated to the rank of state duty. Every boy was assigned a lover from among the young warriors. But forget about the romance of Plato's Symposium. There was no place for lofty feelings here. It was a rigid, hierarchical coupling. The elder received full rights to the body and soul of the younger. It was absolute control. The younger became the shadow of the elder, his squire, servant, and object of passion. But the horror lay in the responsibility. If the boy made a mistake, if he moaned with pain during a flogging or showed cowardice, they did not punish him. They punished his inspirer. They beat the adult warrior for raising his charge poorly. Imagine this burden of guilt on the shoulders of a teenager. You are afraid of pain not because it hurts you. You are afraid that because of your scream, they will beat the person you idolize and whom you are obliged to love by law.
This bound them with mutual responsibility tighter than any chains.
Emotional dependence became total. The boy learned to endure any torment, just not to let down his master. It was a brilliant manipulation of the psyche. They replaced conscience with fear of authority, and love with the duty of submission. By the age of 15, these teenagers were already emotional cripples. They did not know how to laugh, for laughter relaxes. They did not know how to sympathize, for pity for the weak is a betrayal of strength. They looked at the world with a heavy, unblinking gaze of creatures whose souls had been amputated. They were taught to walk without raising their eyes, looking only at their feet so as not to be distracted by the surrounding world. Hands must always be hidden under the cloak. You are invisible. You are a function. You exist only when you are given an order. Spartan society was a machine for producing psychopaths in the service of the state. Psychopaths who functioned ideally in formation, but were absolutely helpless as individuals. They did not know what to do with freedom if it suddenly fell upon them. They were afraid of silence if it was not filled with commands. And this internal vacuum had to be filled with ever-new doses of violence to feel alive. But even this was not enough. The psychological breaking was only preparation for the main exam, for the moment when faith in the system had to pass a test by blood. Not enemy blood, but their own. Ahead of them waited a ritual compared to which biting fingers seemed like an innocent, childish prank. The altar of Artemis Orthia awaited them, a place where holiness was measured in liters of spilled blood, and parental love turned into a demand for martyrdom. The doors of the temple were already opening, and the smell of incense mixed with the metallic taste of fear. If you think hell is a place underground where sinners are boiled in cauldrons, you are mistaken. Hell was located in the center of Sparta, under the open sky, and it was called the Temple of Artemis Orthia. We did not come here to pray. We came to see the culmination of Spartan pedagogy. Forget the silence of libraries and the scratch of styluses on wax. Here the only sound that matters is the whistle of the whip slicing the air, and the wet slap with which skin bursts under the blow. Welcome to the diamastegosis, a bloody liturgy where pain is elevated to the rank of deity. Imagine this day. The sun stands at its zenith, flooding the square in front of the temple with light. The heat is such that the air trembles, but the crowd does not disperse. On the contrary, all of Sparta is here. This is not the execution of criminals. This is the final exam. In the center of attention are teenagers, those very surviving wolf cubs who passed through hunger and cold. Now they stand by the altar, naked to the waist, waiting. They do not tremble. Their faces are frozen masks. They know what will happen now, and they crave it. Because only through suffering can one buy a ticket to the elite here. The ritual begins. Priests take whips in their hands. This is not symbolic punishment. These are instruments of torture made of dried ox sinews, heavy and hard. The first blow. The youth's body shudders, but he makes no sound. Second blow. A red welt appears on the back. Third. Skin bursts, and the first drops of blood fall on the gray stones of the altar. The crowd exhales. But this is not a sigh of horror. It is a sigh of anticipation. Look at the spectators. In the front rows stand not idlers. Parents stand there. Fathers and mothers of those being tortured right now. Look closely into their faces. You will not see tears there. You will not see pleas for mercy there. You will see a fanatical gleam in their eyes. The mother, the very one who once nursed this boy,
now clenches her fists and screams. What does she scream? Endure.
Do not dare lower your eyes. Die, but do not disgrace us.
This is the most monstrous moment of the entire act. The executioner with the whip is just a functionary. But the parents demanding their child be beaten harder, this is the true face of Sparta. Love, here, has mutated into a monstrous form of ambition. If the boy cries, if he asks for mercy, his life is over. He will become an outcast. His mother will curse the day she gave birth to him. Therefore, she screams, encouraging not the son, but the executioner. Hit harder, she demands, because every scar on her child's back is a medal on her chest. It is proof that she produced quality material. And now, look at the priestess. She stands next to the altar, holding an ancient wooden statuette of the goddess Artemis. This is not just an idol. It is part of the mechanism of psychological pressure. Legend has it that this statuette feels pity.
If the floggers, pitying the youth, begin to hit weaker, the priestess suddenly screams that the statue in her hands has become unbearably heavy. "The goddess is displeased," she wails. "She demands blood. You insult her with your softness." And then the whips begin to whistle with doubled fury. Religion here works as the perfect justification for sadism. We don't want to torture you. The goddess wants your blood. We are merely obedient executors of heaven's will. Blood is already pouring in a stream. It splashes onto the statue. It floods the steps of the altar. It mixes with dust. The smell is such that an unaccustomed person would turn inside out. A metallic, thick smell of slaughter. But the youths are silent. Some smile the mad smile of martyrs. They fall into a trance. Endorphins and adrenaline drown out the pain, turning it into ecstasy. They compete with each other. Who will withstand more blows? Who will remain standing when the back turns into a solid mess? It was a contest to destroy the instinct of self-preservation. There were cases, and historians dryly record them, when teenagers died right there, at the altar. The heart could not withstand the pain shock. Or they simply bled out before the priestess gave the sign to stop. And what do you think? Did this become a tragedy? Was mourning declared? No. Death at the altar was considered the highest form of triumph. They were buried as heroes. Monuments were erected to them. They received the title Bomonike, victors at the altar. Think about this absurdity. The state spent 15 years, resources, food, mentors' efforts to raise a soldier, and now it kills him in a senseless ritual, even before he has managed to pick up a spear and see an enemy. Is this rational? No. It is pure madness. But for Sparta, it was logical. They did not need living soldiers who fear pain. They needed dead heroes or living machines for whom pain is simply information, not a reason for fear. The death of one was cement for the steadfastness of the others. Watch how the gaze of those who passed through this changes. Evening descends. Wounded, bloody youths are led away. Their backs will have to be treated for months. Scars will remain forever, turning the skin into a tanned crust resembling crocodile skin. But look them in the eyes. There is nothing human left there. There is emptiness. In this emptiness, the last remnants of pity for oneself and others drowned. He who withstood his own crucifixion under the approving shouts of his mother will never again be able to understand another's pain. He has become invulnerable to compassion. Diamastigosis was the final point in turning a human into a weapon. It was initiation through trauma. They broke the psyche over a knee to reassemble it in the form of an ideal brick.
Now these youths knew. Their body is expendable material. Blood is the currency paid for the greatness of the polis. And they were ready to pay.
But the most terrible thing in this ritual is not physical suffering. Worst of all is the loneliness. Imagine what it is like to realize that in the whole world there is not a single person who would protect you. Your parents are on the side of the executioners. Your gods crave your blood. Your mentors evaluate the depth of the wounds. You are absolutely, cosmically alone in the face of the state machine. And the only way to become part of the whole is to allow this machine to grind you up. When the sun set behind the Taygetos mountains, the square emptied. Only the smell of clotted blood remained, and flies circling over the altar. Sparta received a new batch of graduates. They survived. They proved they are made of steel. But for what? To defend the homeland? Oh no, that is too simple. Ahead of them awaited not a war with Persians or Athenians. Ahead of them awaited practice. And if at the altar they were victims, now they were to become predators. The state handed them a dagger and whispered a new task in their ear. The most secret and the vilest. They were to go out on a hunt. And the game in this hunt was not to be animals, but people living next door. Those who fed them with their bread. You think that after the flogging at the altar the worst is behind. That having washed off the blood and received an approving nod from mother, the youth became a full citizen and protector? What naivety. The altar was merely a test of the hide's durability. Now the system needed to test the durability of the soul. It needed to know if you are capable of not just enduring pain, but inflicting death. Coldly, calculably, without hesitation. And not to an enemy on the battlefield, where a line of comrades covers you, but to an unarmed person in the dark, looking him in the eyes. Welcome to the Crypteia, the darkest, most shameful, and effective secret of Spartan greatness. This word translates as secret affairs. But this is not espionage in our understanding. It was state terrorism directed against its own population. Agoge graduates, those very best of the best, received their first combat assignment. They were given no armor. They were given no shields. They were stripped of even the pitiful clothing they had. All the young killer received was a short sword, a xiphus, or simply a knife and an order. Go and kill. Kill whom? Persians? Athenians? No. Their target was the Helots. Those very slaves on whose shoulders the entire economy of Sparta rested. Those who plowed the land, grew grain, sewed clothes, and built houses, while Spartans practiced killing. There were many Helots, frighteningly many. According to some estimates, for one Spartan there were 7 or even 10 slaves. It was a sea of hatred that could overflow its banks at any moment and drown its masters. And Sparta lived in eternal, sticky fear of this uprising. To keep this mass in obedience, it was not enough to simply beat them with whips. Total, paralyzing terror was needed. And the Crypteia were the instrument of this terror. Every year the ephors, the highest officials of Sparta, upon taking office, first performed a ritual. They officially declared war on the Helots. Think about this legal absurdity. The state declares war on its own subjects. Why? To remove the religious curse from the killers. Murdering a person in peacetime is miasma, a filth that angers the gods. But if war is declared, then murder becomes a feat. It was a bureaucracy of blood allowing killing without sin. And so our graduate sets off on the hunt. During the day, he hides. He lies in roadside ditches,
buries himself in piles of dry leaves, sits in dense bushes. He must not be seen. If he is seen, he will be punished. Not for the intent to kill, but for the inability to be invisible. He is hungry. He is all attention.
He watches the peasants working in the field. Who is he looking for? Criminals? Rebels? Loafers?
No. Sparta's logic here does the most monstrous somersault. The youth looks for the best. He looks out for the strongest helot, the tallest, the one who works faster than everyone, the one in whose eyes shines intelligence, not submission, the one who could become a leader, the one who tomorrow might raise his head and say, "Enough." It was this person who signed his own death warrant with his perfection. It was reverse selection. If in their own ranks Spartans cultivated strength, then in the ranks of slaves they systematically mowed down everything living and capable of resistance, leaving only a gray, downtrodden, weak-willed mass. Night falls. Silence covers the valley. Peasants disperse to their huts, and then out of the darkness they appear. Shadows. Wolves in human form. The youth sneaks up to his victim. No duels, no fair fight.
A knife thrust in the throat of a sleeping man, or an attack on a lonely traveler on the road. Fast, quiet, deadly.
This is not a war of heroes. This is butcher's work. Imagine what an 18-year-old boy feels cutting the throat of a man who, perhaps just yesterday, handed over part of the harvest for his own sustenance. In this moment, the last thing connecting him to humanity, gratitude and compassion, dies within him. He sees fear in the victim's eyes. He feels warm, sticky blood on his hands. And he understands. He is the master. He is the arbiter of fates. This intoxicating feeling of absolute power corrupted the soul irreversibly. They returned to the barracks by morning, washed their daggers, and no one asked questions. It was a secret everyone knew about. Helots knew that any of them might not wake up if they were too strong or too proud. Spartans knew their safety was bought at the price of nightly murders. The Crypteia were the final exam on inhumanity.
You could not become part of the elite without binding yourself with the blood of a slave. This created a mutual responsibility of monstrous power. We are all killers here. We are all accomplices here. We have nowhere to run from this submarine. If the Helots rise, they will spare no one, because we did not spare their best sons. This turned Sparta into a besieged fortress, where the enemy was not outside the walls, but inside, in every house, in every field. Ancient authors write that Spartans treated Helots so cruelly and insultingly, not simply out of sadism, but to break their spirit. They forced them to drink undiluted wine and brought them drunk into the Syssitia, public mess halls, to show the youth, look how disgusting a slave is. Look how he loses his human form. Do not be like them. But the real irony was that by killing and humiliating slaves, Spartans themselves lost their human form much faster. Who looks more like a beast? A drunken peasant, or a sober youth coldly slitting his throat in the night? The Crypteia taught the main thing. For a Spartan, there is no morality outside the interests of the state. There are only us and them. Life to us, death to them. And the concept of them was very broad. Today it is a helot. Tomorrow, a resident of a neighboring polis. The day after tomorrow, anyone who disagrees with the law of Lycurgus. It was a school for professional punishers, special agents of the ancient world for whom there are no forbidden methods. After a year of such service in the death squads, the youth changed forever. His gaze became heavy,
evaluating. He learned to move silently. He learned to see a threat in every rustle. He learned to kill without emotions. Now he was ready. Ready for what? For war? Yes. But he was also ready for the next stage of his life, which for any normal person is a celebration. But for a Spartan, another strange and frightening duty.
He proved he knows how to take lives.
Now the state demanded he learn to create these lives. But, like everything in Sparta, even love here was turned inside out, turned into a special operation under the cover of night. The graduate with a bloody knife returned to formation to receive a new assignment: get married. And this marriage would look more like a kidnapping and continuation of war than a union of two hearts. The darkness that hid his crimes in the Crypteia was now to become the only witness to his family life. In Sparta, even a wedding looked like a crime. If in Athens marriage was a public contract, a celebration with torches, music, and hymns to Hymen, then here it began with violence. Ritual, legalized, but still violence. The groom did not court the bride. He did not give her gifts, did not read poems, and did not ask her father for her hand at a family dinner. He had to kidnap her. Literally.
Grab her, throw her over his shoulder, and carry her away while she fought back.
Of course, often this was a staging agreed upon by parents, but the form itself, capture of prey, spoke volumes. The woman here is a trophy that must be taken by force. But what happened next, behind the closed doors of the house, is capable of shocking even a modern person accustomed to extravagance. Imagine this scene. The kidnapped girl is passed into the hands of a so-called bridesmaid. But she does not dress her in white, does not decorate her with flowers, and does not anoint her with oils. She takes a knife or scissors and shaves the bride's head bald, completely, to shiny skin. The symbol of femininity, long hair, falls to the floor, mixing with dust. Why? What is the sense in this? Wait, that is not all. After the haircut, the girl is changed. She is given a man's cloak and sandals. She is made to look like a teenage boy, and in this form, bald, in men's clothes, she is laid on a bedding of straw, in total darkness. She lies alone, in silence, and waits. This is not a marriage bed. This looks more like a prison cell or an ambush. And where is the husband? The happy newlywed is not sitting at a festive table. He is in the barracks, at the Syssidia, the public meal. He eats his portion of black broth, a brew of pig blood, vinegar, and lentils, the taste of which caused a gag reflex in guests from other poleis. He jokes with comrades, laughs, discusses military maneuvers. He pretends nothing is happening. No one should notice that today, his life has changed. Marriage is a shameful secret, a weakness that must be hidden. And only when deep night falls, when the overseers fall asleep and the city plunges into darkness, does he begin his special operation. He does not go to his wife proudly, like a master. He sneaks like a thief. He climbs over fences, hides in shadows, avoids patrols. If he gets caught on the way to his own wife, he will be mocked and punished. This is absurdity elevated to law. The state forces you to violate discipline for the sake of fulfilling a demographic duty. He penetrates the room where his wife lies. There is no lamp, not even a splinter torch in the room. Absolute, thick blackness. He does not see her face. He finds the body by touch. But whose body is this? Under his hands is the coarse wool of a man's cloak. By touch, a shaved head, like his comrades in the barracks. Psychologists and historians argue about this moment to this day. Was this done to ease the transition for a warrior who all his life saw only male bodies and might experience disgust or fear before female nature? Was this an attempt to deceive his instincts by slipping him a surrogate boy? Or was this a way to humiliate the woman, depriving her of identity even in the moment of intimacy? In this darkness, there was no place for tenderness.
There were no long conversations. Everything happened quickly, functionally, almost roughly. He performed what the state demanded of him, sowed the seed, and immediately after that he had to leave, escape. He had no right to stay and fall asleep next to her. He could not wake up in the morning and see her face in the first rays of the sun. He had to return to the barracks before dawn to stand in formation at the morning roll call, as if nothing had happened. This continued not for a week and not for a month. This lasted for years. Plutarch writes that many Spartans managed to become fathers of several children before first seeing their wife's face in daylight. Think about that. You have children, but you do not know the color of their mother's eyes in sunlight. You live with a person who for you is merely a phantom in the night, a warm body in the dark, a function, not a personality. Lycurgus explained this with his twisted logic of abstinence. He claimed that such secrecy preserves the sharpness of feelings. If husband and wife see each other constantly, they get satiated, their passion fades, and children are born sluggish. But if every meeting is a risk, a theft, a short moment of forbidden fruit, then passion will burn forever, and the offspring will be fierce. Again, we see this engineering approach. Human emotions are merely fuel for the bioreactor. Love was dosed with a dropper so it would not turn into attachment that could compete with love for Sparta. After all, a family is, in essence, a small conspiracy of two against the whole world. It is a place where a person has something of their own, personal, intimate. Sparta did not need such conspiracies. It did not need personal. Therefore, the man was forcibly kept in the state of an eternal teenager living in a dormitory. His real family remained his squad, his real home, the Syssitia. And the wife? The wife was something like a secret vice, a necessary evil for the sake of procreation.
By the age of 30, a Spartan finally received the status of equal and the right to live at home. But by this time, his psyche was already concreted. He did not know how to live in a house. He was uncomfortable in silence and peace. He was used to the snoring of comrades, the smell of sweat and gun oil. He was a stranger in his own family. Children looked at him as a visiting commander, the wife as a stern master with whom she was bound only by a common duty to the state. Between them lay an abyss dug by decades of barracks drill. This marriage in the dark is the perfect metaphor for the entire Spartan society. They lived in the darkness of ignorance, intentionally walling themselves off from the rest of the world, from culture, from art, from feelings. They groped through life blindly, accepting crude surrogates as truth. And this conveyor, launched in a gloomy bedroom, worked flawlessly. New children were born in darkness, only to be thrown into a gorge or stolen into barracks. The circle closed. But a system built on the suppression of nature cannot be eternal. A human is not a machine. Biology takes its toll. The irony of fate was that precisely this obsession with blood purity and physical perfection, for which they sacrificed love and family, eventually led them to degeneration. The mechanism, working at the limit of revolutions, began to overheat. Gears lubricated with blood began to wear down. And while Spartans, sneaking, ran to their shaved wives, a completely different darkness was already gathering over their city. the darkness of a demographic catastrophe that could not be defeated by sword, nor whip, nor beautiful laws on eugenics. The great experiment was approaching its logical and pitiful finale.
And so came the moment when the great machine, lubricated with blood and sweat, let out the first, still barely audible, screech. This sound was more terrible than the roar of Persian chariots. It was the sound of emptiness. Historians call this by the dry term oliganthropia, scarcity of people. But let us translate this into the language of reality. It means that at parades where thousands used to march, now stood hundreds. It means that in houses built for large families, wind whistled through empty corridors. Sparta, obsessed with quality, forgot about quantity, and biology presented it with a bill that could not be paid with valor or iron discipline. Let us look at the numbers, but not with the eyes of a mathematician, but with the eyes of a pathologist. During the Greco-Persian Wars, Sparta could field 8,000 full citizens, Spartiates, 8,000 ideal killers. It seemed like a force, but only 100 years passed. 100 years of selection, 100 years of throwing infants into the abyss, 100 years of ritual murders and endless wars. And what do we see? By the time of the Battle of Leuctra, fewer than 1,000 remained. Think about it. An entire state claiming hegemony in Hellas relied on a group of people that today could fit in one movie theater. Where did they go? They became victims of their own perfectionism. The system worked like a mad filter, the mesh of which became tighter every year. You didn't pass the wine check at birth, death. You didn't withstand the flogging at the altar, shame and exclusion from citizens. You couldn't pay the contribution to the Syssitia because your estate went bust, deprivation of rights. You showed cowardice, exile. The state methodically cut off pieces of living flesh from itself, leaving only the golden ratio. But it turned out that you cannot build a wall out of pure gold. It is too soft, and there is too little of it. Nature abhors a vacuum, and it struck a blow where it was not expected. The 464th year BC, the earth beneath Laconia shook. A massive earthquake destroyed the city that had no walls. Gymnasiums, barracks, houses, everything turned into ruins. Under the rubble perished hundreds of the best warriors, the flower of the nation. But the worst began a minute after the shock. The Helots, those two-legged cattle who had been humiliated and killed in Crypteus for centuries, saw a sign from the gods in the destruction. They saw that their masters were mortal, that their houses fall just like the huts of slaves, and they revolted. It was not just a war, it was a massacre. Decades of suppressed hatred spilled out. Spartans, having just lost loved ones under stones, were forced to fight for survival in their own home. And here the terrible truth was revealed. They were too few. The ratio of forces was catastrophic. One master against 10, 20, 100 slaves. The system held together by fear collapsed as soon as the fear vanished. Sparta had to humiliate itself. It had to ask for help from other Greeks, even from the hated democratic Athens, to suppress the revolt of its own slaves. This was the first bell, a loud, furious alarm bell announcing the beginning of the end. But Sparta did not hear, or did not want to hear. Instead of reforming, opening the sluices, giving rights to new people, they tightened the screws even harder. They closed in on themselves. And this led to intellectual degeneration, which became more terrible than physical. They drove out poets, banned philosophers. Excess thoughts weakened the will, said the ephors. In the end, they got a generation of soldiers who perfectly knew how to execute orders, but had completely forgotten how to think strategically.
The world around was changing. Athens invented new tactics, developed a fleet, trade, diplomacy.
In Thebes, genius commanders were born, who studied the geometry of battle. But Sparta froze in the Bronze Age. Their tactics remained unchanged: stand in a line and crush with mass. But there was no mass left, and there was not enough mind to compensate for the lack of strength with cunning. They turned into dinosaurs, huge, scary, armored lizards, looking with bewilderment at nimble mammals, not understanding why old hunting methods no longer work. Moreover, the society of equals rotted from the inside from money. Lycurgus banned gold and silver, introducing the famous iron obols, which were impossible to hide and shameful to hoard. But after the victory over Athens, trophies poured into Sparta. Lysander brought mountains of gold, and it turned out that iron people are greedy for luxury even more than pampered Ionians. Corruption corroded the elite. Equality remained only on paper. Super-rich dynasties appeared, and destitute citizens who lost rights and fell out of the clip. And here another time bomb went off. The woman question. Remember those very women trained like brood mares? Since men died en masse in wars, inheritance passed to daughters and widows. By the 4th century BC, according to Aristotle, 2/5 of all land in Sparta belonged to women. It was a paradox. In the most patriarchal, militaristic society of Greece, economic power ended up in the hands of rich heiresses. To keep wealth within the family, intermarriage began. Spartans married cousins, nieces. The genetic pool, tiny as it was, turned into a stagnant swamp. Incest finished off what eugenics had not. New generations of supermen were born weak, with hereditary diseases, with the stamp of degeneration on their faces. Those who were supposed to be the elite of humanity turned into a caricature of their own ancestors. An atmosphere of despondency and suspicion reigned in the city. Streets where thousands once marched, now frightened with their silence. Shops were empty. Spartans were forbidden to engage in crafts, and helots and perioikoi did it without enthusiasm. Sparta resembled an aging champion sitting in an empty gym, sorting through old medals and shaking a fist at passers-by, although his muscles had long gone flabby, and senile marasmus could be read in his eyes. They were still trying to play the role of the gendarme of Greece. They sent garrisons, dictated will, overthrew democracies. But it was inertia. The myth of Sparta's invincibility lived longer than Sparta itself. Neighbors feared not real strength, but the shadow of the past. The red cloak of a Spartan still caused awe, but under this cloak there was no longer that monolithic body as at Thermopylae. There was a skeleton, covered in parchment skin. It was agony stretched out in time. A system created for the production of death eventually began to produce the death of its own people. Obsession with purity led to sterility. Obsession with strength led to fragility. Spartans were so afraid of external influence that they suffocated in their own juices. They killed everything human in themselves to become ideal tools, but forgot that a tool without a hand to guide it is just a piece of metal. And this hand, a living, flexible, creative mind, was chopped off by the law of Lycurgus many centuries ago. And so, clouds gather on the horizon. These are not Persians coming. These are their own, Greeks, Thebans. They do not fear myths. They see the truth. They see that the king is not just naked, the king is dying. History was preparing the stage for the last act of this tragedy. An act where pride would be broken, and greatness would turn to dust under the feet of new heroes.
Time inexorably counted down the last days to the battle that was to put a period in this prolonged experiment on human nature. The plain near the city of Leuctra was already waiting for its bloody harvest. The year 371 BC arrived.
The year mathematics defeated myth.
The location, the plain at Leuctra, a field scorched by the Boeotian sun, destined to become the grave of Spartan greatness. Here, clashing shields, came two armies. On one side, Spartans led by King Cleombrotus. They were confident. They had 3 centuries of impeccable reputation as invincible monsters behind them. On the other side, Thebans, under the command of Epaminondas. Spartans looked at them with contempt. What can these flute lovers know about real war? But on that day, Epaminondas brought not just spears to the battlefield, he brought innovation. All their history, Spartans fought according to one template: stretch the phalanx into a line, put the best fighters on the right flank, and crush with mass. It was a ritual as immutable as a sacrifice. They believed war is a competition of bravery, not cunning. Epaminondas was an intellectual. He understood that the standard phalanx is a relic, and he decided on unheard-of audacity.
He abandoned symmetry. Instead of stretching his troops, he gathered a striking fist on his left flank. He built a column 50 shields deep, 50 rows of living, furious flesh against the standard Spartan 12. It was the oblique order, a monstrous hammer raised over the head of the Spartan king. While Spartans were lining up, observing beautiful intervals and listening to flutists' commands, Thebans had already begun their run. This was not a battle. This was physics. Mass multiplied by acceleration. The impact was terrible. Like a freight train crashing into a brick wall. The Spartan elite, those very equals who passed the hell of Agoge, were simply swept away. Their individual skill, their ability to endure pain, their honed strikes, all this did not matter when an avalanche weighing hundreds of tons crashed down on them. 50 shields against 12. The laws of mechanics turned out to be stronger than the laws of Lycurgus. King Cleombrotus fell one of the first. A furious pile-up boiled around his body, but it was already agony. For the first time in centuries, Spartans, seeing the death of their king, did not fly into a berserker rage, but faltered. The sacred law stating victory or death cracked. They began to retreat, not organized, but in panic. The great Spartan formation crumbled like a house of cards in the wind. On that day on the field at Leuctra, 400 out of 700 citizen Spartans died. Think about this figure. In one day, the nation lost more than half of its gene pool, its elite, its brain. The myth of invincibility they built for centuries evaporated in a couple of hours. Greece froze in shock. It turned out that the lion can be killed. It turned out that Spartans are not demigods, but just people who can be outsmarted, surrounded, and destroyed. Epaminondas did not just defeat an army. He broke the psychological backbone of the entire system. The fear on which Sparta's hegemony rested disappeared. And as soon as fear disappeared, obedience disappeared.
Messenian helots, living in slavery for centuries, raised their heads. Allies turned away. Sparta shrank to the size of its city. But the most humiliating part was ahead. Sparta did not perish overnight, like Atlantis. No, its fate was worse. It began to rot alive. Proud warriors who once dictated their will to kings turned into museum exhibits. Time passed, and Rome captured Greece. Romans, those pragmatic cynics, adored bloody spectacles, and Sparta became a tourist attraction for them. Rich Roman patricians came to Laconia not to learn wisdom, but to tickle their nerves. They came to the temple of Artemis or Thea, sat on specially built stands. Yes, they built stands there, like in a circus, and watched Spartans beat their children half to death with whips. What was once a sacred ritual of hardening the spirit turned into a commercial show for bored tourists. "Look, what savages. Look how amusingly they endure pain," whispered the spectators, chewing grapes. Spartans, descendants of Leonidas, now sold their cruelty as a souvenir. They became a caricature of themselves. The factory city continued to work, but its products were no longer needed by anyone. They continued to march, continued to eat black broth, continued to hate art, but the world around was already flying into the cosmos of philosophy and science, while they were still sharpening stone axes. The finale of this story is a verdict on any system that tries to fit a human into a standard. Sparta dreamed of creating an ideal society, a society without crime, without greed, without fear. But to create it, they had to amputate everything that makes a human alive: love, pity, creativity, family. They created an ideal mechanism, but forgot that a mechanism cannot reproduce and cannot adapt. They killed weak infants so the nation would become healthy, but the nation died out.
They banned luxury to preserve equality, but bogged down in corruption. They destroyed the family for the sake of the state, but in the end, there was no one left to defend this state. The Spartan experiment proved one simple and terrible truth. Efficiency elevated to an absolute becomes suicide. You cannot endlessly compress the spring of human nature. One day it will either break or shoot you right in the face. Athens left us theater, democracy, sculpture, philosophy. We still argue with Plato and laugh at the comedies of Aristophanes. And what did Sparta leave us? A beautiful legend about 300 suicide bombers, which they love to adapt for the screen, and the word laconic. Not a single poem, not a single formula, not a single building. Only ruins of barracks and graves, graves, graves. We look at them with horror and admiration. We like their strength, their integrity, their no said in the face of death. But ask yourself honestly, standing over this historical abyss, would you want to live in such an ideal world? Would you want your son to be taken away at 7 and taught to kill peers for a piece of bread? Would you want your daughter shaved bald on her wedding night? Sparta is a warning. It is a monument to human pride, which decided it could rewrite the laws of nature. They wanted to create steel, but received only brittle glass that shattered into smithereens from the first blow of the real hammer of history. So was perfection worth such a price? Or perhaps our imperfection, our weakness, our fears, and our ability to love, is that the only thing that makes us invincible in eternity? Everyone must give the answer to this question themselves. But remember, in the silence of ruined Sparta, the wind still howls with the voices of those sacrificed for a utopia that never arrived.